register, but we also want to make it easy for every IP to be composable with one another. So if you want to clone or use multiple IPs to create something else, let's say you love all the characters from one anime series and all the characters from another one, and you want to make a mashup and create a collaboration, it should be easy to import all of those IPs dynamically and permissionlessly. So turning every IP into a Lego block. A bit like what Git and GitHub did for code, we want to do for IP. And that's the whole purpose behind Story. How do we make IP shareable, composable, and programmable? Bring a big team of lawyers with you in order to negotiate the right terms, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be through this very centralized and top-down approach. What if every single IP in the world self-described the terms with which it can be used? What if, a bit like a QR code, right? Right now today, QR codes are used to connect the real world with the digital world. You scan the QR code to access a payment window, you scan a QR code to open a menu, you scan a QR code to meet someone on Telegram. What if we had the concept of a QR code, right, that was the same but for IP? So every image you see on the internet, every video that you watch had some form of embedded metadata that says, here are my license terms, here's how you can use me, and here's the conditions that you need to follow if you want to use them. And that's what we mean by programmable, is every single file on the internet, ideally, will have these terms embedded. And the way that we enforce that, and the way that we make this programmable, is all of these license terms are codified. They are represented in code. So, when you register your IP, you said, hey, where can this IP be used? What do you need to give me in exchange? What do you need to do in terms of revenue share? What do you need to, what are the content restrictions? And all of this can be queried by code. So you can filter IPs dynamically with code that follow certain criteria. And when you need to, you can off-ramp this IP to the real world by generating a license from these terms. And by doing so, every IP, as I said, has this QR code embedded. So why do we need this? We're in a special point in history where we really should be living in a digital renaissance. And there's two main reasons for this. The first one is that we have amazing distribution channels. So social media is turning everyone into potentially a influencer, KOL, call it what you want, but anyone potentially has access to millions or billions of people, whether it be on Instagram, TikTok, your favorite social platform, it doesn't really matter. The internet makes it possible to distribute your content like never before. And likewise, it's never been easier to create content. It's never been easier to, for anyone, regardless of what resources you have, regardless of what skills you have, as long as you have an idea, you can create something. So what I have behind me is Sora, right, by OpenAI. It's a video model that generates videos just from a prompt. And this was launched, months ago, and things are already evolving beyond that. And think of what AI will be in like 5-10 years. So the limiting factor is not how many visual artists you have, it's not how many writers you have, but it's what ideas do you have, and do those ideas tap into the passion of people? And the passion of people are very tightly connected with IP, because IP is something that, on the monetary aspect, has value, right? We see as IP as being something that has value, but why does it have value? It has value because people are fans, because people are willing to pay to be associated with that IP in some way, right? Like Pokemon. I want to have a Pokemon fluffy Pikachu, right? That doesn't, if you take a very similar fluffy creature that's not a Pokemon, it's suddenly worth a lot less. And it's not because it's made with worse materials. It's literally because people don't feel that emotional attachment. So being able to tap into the emotional attachment of IP is going to be more and more critical as content can be created by anyone, anywhere. And we think that the main limiting factor of, despite having amazing distribution, despite having amazing tools at our disposal, is the IP system has not caught up with this. Because the IP system is still the one that we're using from the printing press. It's still the system that was invented when books used to be copied by hand, and suddenly books could be copied with a printer, right, with a printing press, and so we needed a way to protect the authors. And that's the same system that we're using today. And a couple examples of why the current IP system is failing. I don't know if you've seen any of these two examples, but on the left, you have the AI-generated fashion show with all of the famous actors by Balenciaga, right? And on the right, you have an AI-generated song created by someone called Ghostwriter. This was launched like last year, and it became super popular. It immediately got millions and millions of views in a matter of days. And the reason it got popular is because it was using Drake's vocals, right? So he recorded the song, and then he adapted his vocals to be the ones of Drake's voice. What happened in both of these cases? Both of them got taken down. Both of them got demonetized because there weren't any remixing terms available. And so the creators of these content didn't get anything. The owners of the rights, right, like Harry Potter or the two actors, Harry Potter, I'm blanking on his name, but you get the idea. Him and Drake aren't getting any revenue from any of this, but they could and they should, because remixing is part of the internet and will always be happening. So it makes sense for everyone that has IP to self-describe and to permissionlessly let others remix on it according to the right terms. And another reason why we're seeing this fail is if you think about the map. Testing, okay, I turned it off. Another reason why we're seeing this fail is currently OpenAI models, big, large language models like OpenAI, are basically hoovering up all of the content of the internet. And they're not really respecting any rules. And this has far-reaching consequences. And currently, the only people that are able to contrast this are big companies, right? So like the Times is able to sue OpenAI because they realized that they trained OpenAI on all of the past articles. But what about, independent creators? And another way to think about it is right now today with OpenAI and big AI models, we are in a bit of a Napster moment. I don't know who is old enough to remember, but 10, 15 years ago, the easier way to watch a movie was to just download it, right? And the legal way to watch a movie was to go to the video store and rent the physical movie. It was much more inconvenient. It was much slower. It was not as easy. And so people just pirated content. But today, with Netflix, with YouTube, with all sorts of other legal sites, people are able to watch content legally because the system has evolved. And we are right now in the Napster moment of IP and the internet. The internet does not care about IP right now, but that's not the internet's fault. The fault is caring about IP on the internet is way too complicated and has too much friction. And that's why we need to change it. And if we don't fix it, if we don't find a solution for this, what's going to happen is big and large language models will continue to sweep up all of the data. And people will start using the language models more and more. And will visit fewer and fewer sites, right? And the creators will be less and less incentivized to contribute to their own personal sites because they have less and less traffic. And it's basically a vicious cycle where there's less traffic, there's less demand, and we have what's called tragedy of the commons, where everyone's trying to eat each other's grass without considering that it might run out. Right? And a classic example is, let's say you're working on a personal blog, right? And your blog is best places to eat in Ho Chi Minh. and Perplexity or OpenAI starts ingesting this into their own model. And people ask the model, hey, where are the best places to eat in Ho Chi Minh? And it'll give them the reasons, or it'll give them the places. And people will not come to your blog anymore. And you see less traffic coming, and you're like, what's the point of me continuing to write a blog? So we really need a way to fix this and a way to give the right attribution to the right creators, whether it's IP or whether it's AI content. AI models need to attribute the owners of the IP, and we need a way for them to get value back from the models themselves. And the only way to do that is to modernize the IP system. So I'm going to go a bit faster, but this is the current situation that we face today. Right? We have print books and radio and film, very much top-down industries at the moment, or traditionally, and the copyright system was made and is covering those use cases. But we're suddenly facing an explosion of content, an explosion of co-creation and remixing. And this is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger with generative AI. So we need a new IP system. And that's why Story exists. A new IP system that is made from the ground up to be internet native. And that's why we built Story. Make every single IP programmable Lego block that anyone can seamlessly license, anyone can seamlessly use, and most of all of the attribution is tracked like a graph. So as people build on your IP, as you build on other people's IP, and let's say multiple artists are working together, they go to register artwork, they add the metadata of their artwork, right? And they register it, they choose their license terms, which we're skipping here for the sake of simplicity. And this IP is now registered on Story and can be found and searched for on the Story Hub, which is a place where we will index and show all of the IP. Let's say someone else wants to create a manga using this character that was created on Magma, right? But first, they need to generate different poses using AI. So they license this concept art and generate different poses using an AI tool. And in this case, this AI tool is Mahojin, which is also an application building on Story. They generate different poses, they generate whatever they need, and then once they have the different poses, they want to import them into a tool to generate the manga. In this case, an interactive web novel on Sept, which is an ecosystem project on Story as well. So they add the character, they add the various pages, they write the story, and the webcomic is finished and published. Now, whenever there's a monetization opportunity, even though it happened across different apps with different contributors and no app talk to each other, all of the monetization is going to flow back to the original creators. And this is the only way in which IP can live in a world where things are happening basically at the speed of light. So these are just two examples of how this works. For those of you who are technical, I'm going to breeze through this part just to give you a little bit of an overview, and then we can skip. But the high-level structure of Story is there's several layers. The first layer is the L1, right? Then there's a proof of creativity protocol, which is the actual brains, the actual operating system. So you can think of the L1 like the computer, and the proof of creativity protocol as the operating system on that computer. And this is the protocol that actually regulates things like registering the IP, royalties flowing in and out, license terms, minting licenses, disputes, etc. And as part of the proof of creativity protocol, we have the programmable IP license. And this programmable IP license is what on-ramps and off-ramps IP to and from Story into the real world. And of course, on top of that, we have the application that they're actually building, like the ones that I just showed you. So one common question is, why did you guys build an L1? So the answer to this is that we actually didn't want to build an L1. We started wanting to just build the protocol level. We wanted to build a protocol and publish the protocol, but we realized, hey, if we publish these contracts on different chains, all of the IP state will be fragmented, And no one can compose across IPs if they're on different chains. So then what we said is like, we need a consolidated state. Oop. I think this is just a Wi-Fi. Okay. We need a consolidated state. And so we tried an L2. We tried to build an L2. We actually built it. And we deployed the protocol on the L2. And we realized that we could only have, let's say, a couple hundred ancestors before the whole protocol ran out of gas to do any operation. That's because IP, especially if we think about IP in the modern era, where hundreds of people are contributing to it and potentially creating compilations and different remixes, will have thousands and thousands of ancestors that are original contributors to any IP that's created, right? And so we really needed to have an efficient way to traverse this massive graph. But the TLDR is right now, the L1 is an EVM compatible blockchain using Cosmos SDK. Here's some examples of, I can skip this if you have questions, but this is an example of the gas usage before and after we enshrined the protocol at the L1 level. And one note that I want to make is we actually don't really care too much about the tech. And what I mean by that is the tech can always change. What we care more about is actually getting the IP system modernized, and whatever tech will emerge in the future that is going to be more performant, that is going to be more composable with existing or future primitives, we will definitely add it or expand to it or integrate it. So don't get too fixed up about the tech. A lot of Web3 projects get obsessed about the tech and get very tribal about the tech and think that if you don't use tech number 1 or X, it's bad. If you use tech number Y, it's good. It's just an implementation detail, right? The important thing is who's using it and is it adding value? So yeah, we talked about the proof of creativity protocol. This is the high-level overview of the various components. You can read more about it on our documentation, but at a very high level, when you register an IP on Story, what's happening is it's creating an NFT, right? And that NFT, if it already exists, you don't have to create an NFT, but if it doesn't exist, like a real-world IP, you create an NFT on Story. And that NFT has a token-bound account associated to it. And that token-bound account is what regulates all of the IP. So things like the licenses, the license terms, the royalty tokens, access control, the disputes, all of that happens within the IP account. And the good thing about how we're structuring the protocol is it's very modular, so others can expand it. So if you have a use case that's not being currently implemented, others can come in and add their own modules. Just for the sake of, okay. Oh yeah, thanks for zooming out. Why are we here today? Almost finished, promise. Why are we here today? We want, with Story Academy, we want to help any project wanting to build an ecosystem. And the way that we're going to do that is partially with, traditional financial support, but most importantly with other forms of support. With existing projects, we've given them support in fundraising, we've given them support in co-marketing, we've given them support in networking with other big name projects. Because the success of a project is not just about grants, it's about how is it a sustainable business. And we really want to focus the Academy on building sustainable businesses rather than just giving out money that will end up being wasted. And I've seen that happen in the past at other projects. So TLDR for Story Academy, we want quality over quantity. We're not just we don't just think about grants, we think about how are we creating companies that can self-sustain in the long term and actually provide strong use cases. Of course, grants can definitely be a part of it. And there's two main programs. The first one is the accelerator, which is mainly for existing companies that need to go from, let's say, either want to add Story or are already in an established company and just need an extra kick to go from 1 to 100. And then there's the incubator, which is for very early stage ideas or small founders that want to go from 0 to 1. So think of the incubator like 0 to 1 and accelerator from 1 to 100, and both of them will have very similar types of support. Yeah, and things like VC network introductions, grants, as I said, help with marketing and distribution, technical support with the DevRel team and the engineers. Every project from Story Academy is welcome to join us in San Francisco and work with us. We also have like a small budget. Well, actually, not a small budget. We have a budget for each team to come to San Francisco if they want, and also opportunities to pitch your projects to investors. So there's 3 main areas that we are really interested in for Story Academy in terms of what projects to have. I'll go in reverse order because when we get to IPFi, I'll hand the mic over to Bufan, who will go into a bit more detail about the IPFi side. But the first one is obviously AI. Everyone's talking about AI, everyone's using AI. It's not a matter of, is it the next thing? It's the current thing, and it's just going to be more and more part of everyday tools, everyday things that we use. So it's basically a no-brainer. How does AI attribute creators correctly? How do we add that IP layer to AI? So any project working around that is very much highly sought after. We're already working with AI companies, but there's always room for more. The second one is creator and consumer apps. Where is IP being created, and can we onboard it? Can we easily let creators register their IP without even thinking about it? Because the easiest way to get people to do something is for them to do it without even realizing it. So as I showed you with Magma, as I showed you with other tools, putting Story as a path to when the IP is created to when it's registered, and make that part as seamless as possible, that's what we want to see. And then thirdly, IPFi. So by tokenizing IP and having things like licenses, which are tokens as well, and having things like royalty tokens, which are tokens, ERC20s, right? All of this opens up a lot of possibilities around, what economics, what financial primitives can be created on top of IP. Something that today is just not possible because IP is in papers, in folders, in the legal offices, and you can't just simply trade a fraction of an IP without first going through a negotiation process. But with Story, all of that is pretty much seamless, and IP can become a lot more liquid. So I'm going to hand it over to Bufan to go maybe like 5-7 minutes or even more to go through a little bit more about IPFi, and then we will wrap it up. So Bufan, thank you. And
Hi everyone. Hello. So good afternoon.
Yeah. It's for recording.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be talking about IPFi, or Intellectual Property Finance on Story. So my real name is Bufan, but for most of you, probably if you follow us on Twitter, I actually go by IP Morgan. So this is the real person behind IP Morgan. First of all, thanks for coming today. Happy to see some of the builders that are doing it. So I know many of us here, are not building DeFi projects. I know a lot of you are on the AI front or content consumer ad front. So before I go into intellectual property financing, I want to kind of take a step back and just look at the role of finance and what does that actually do in the other industries that it has supported. So if we look at the role of finance in general, right? Finance has always been a central facilitator, and that's the role that has played in every single industry that it has touched. If you look at the top two, these are more traditional industries. You have commodities and manufacturing. If you think about how these industries are ran, they need a lot of capital to build up the factories, the methods of production, and what then it ends up with is outputs that people consume and pay for. But finance is also very relevant, even in capital-light industries like the new ones like tech, of which Ask Crypto is one of them. You don't need to spend a lot of capital to build factories, but still, with many of the new tech companies like Facebook, Netflix, money is what ties, capital is what ties all the players together. And I think this is no different from for intellectual property, right? So I believe that finance will play a key facilitator role in the formation and transfer of property. So in this chart here, I have created a kind of high-level conceptual map of how finance generally plays a role, and this is also relevant to intellectual property. There are really three big groups of participants in any industry, and think of this, I think, in the context of IP today. The first are the builders. This is most of us here today, right? We either form companies, we form DAOs, unions, but starting something new in in building something like IPFi. I like to go to first principles and chart it out there because there's not that much references to how to build something like this in the traditional world, even in Web3. So two things I want to start with as principles. The first is, if you guys don't already know, Story is going to go to mainnet at the end of this year, which means that it's probably about 3 months-ish out or so. So that's not a lot of time, right? So that's a limiting factor is about the time and resources that we have. Two is Story is an open ecosystem, so a lot of things that must be designed with the idea that it must be permissionless and open, and a lot of it will be experimentation. And so with that, this is the sequence of how I see IPFi developing on Story. The first is core DeFi. So core DeFi really is about using existing tools that are in crypto that I think many of you will be familiar with, like DEXs and Protocol, to fulfill the basic function of existing asset transfer and formation. So think of it in this way. In 3 months, Story is launching. A lot of you guys, especially on the Twitter and AI side, if you guys have been working on your projects for a very long time, when you're thinking of tokens, you're thinking of ERC20 tokens. You are thinking probably of ERC721 NFT tokens. For those of you who are a bit more experimental, ERC404 semi-fungible assets that represent your kind of IP. But these are all asset formats that are supported by existing DeFi. Trading venues like DEXs are able to support all this. NFT marketplaces support the trading of NFT assets. And so at the very start, in terms of practicality, these are the ones that Story's core DeFi will focus on, getting the base layer all settled so that everybody can use existing token formats to facilitate the creation and transfer of value. One particular thing, if you're in the launchpad business, we think that as launchpads are in the early cycle of capital asset formation, that IP launchpads would be very important and should focus not on whether the IP that they are funding is a brand name, is it Disney, is it any name that you recognize. I think IPFi on Story and launchpads should focus on creators that have a following. Right? What matters is that your IP assets are going to be looked at, consumed, and form an emotional connection with people that can grow bigger. So that's one of the things that core DeFi I would like to focus on for the early phase. And last thing, I think this is something that DeFi has done very well in the last 3 to 4 years, and where most of the incentive innovations have happened. So DeFi has experimented with a few key incentive mechanisms. One being liquidity mining. I'm sure a lot of you have done this before. 2 V33 models, and 3, I think in this year, a lot of point mechanisms. Actually, what these mechanisms do is that they bootstrap user bases, overcoming what we call a cool start problem, which is you have no users and you have no assets at the start. So we think that core DeFi applications here should help IP projects bootstrap their assets and their users. Just taking the learnings of what DeFi protocols have experimented with in the past 3 years and to apply the best lessons that are learned from them. But after building the core DeFi applications, the next thing, and I think concurrent with core DeFi are now what we are scaling into IP-specific finance verticals. So here, as Andrea has mentioned, we have new token formats, right? License tokens. We have royalty tokens. These are not token formats that are used anywhere. Here, there are now token formats that are more specific to intellectual property, and we think that IPFi builders should start looking into these token formats to facilitate asset creation and transfer of value that is in ways more relevant to intellectual property creators. For example, setting of licenses to third parties that want to build on your assets. It's a way to potentially fundraise. You don't necessarily have to do ERC20 assets. Right? So these are some things that we would love for people to experiment on. And another one that we are looking at quite closely is the idea of meme coins as IP. For any of you who have bought into a meme coin and participated in a community before, I think you guys know the overarching principle of a meme coin is that there's one, a lot of people, there's a successful meme coin, and two, that there's usually a central image, whether it's a frog like Pepe or some kind of cute dog or cat mascot. And if you think about it, if a community has formed around a central image, it makes a lot of sense for these projects to start developing into cartoons, into movies that may be stylistically in line with what the community is expecting. So meme coins as an IP strategy is something that we think has long-term potential as well. Then, 6 months to a year out on Story, we are expecting that there will be some IP assets that will grow in audience and will have formed a kind of sizable following. And this can be in two ways. Right? One is a very ground up type of approach. So in Web 2, I think analogies would be something like Ho Chi Minh City, Vocaloid, where there are a lot of ground level musicians using that software to create music and kind of supporting the IP. It could also be IP that's driven by a very talented team at the top down. So some of you, I think now in the news a lot, we see is that Chinese Monkey King game, Wukong, right? That is driven by a very small Chinese studio, spent multiple years building lore a game, and that's an IP that's also very valuable. But regardless of how it's formed, I think the central theme is that these IPs are very have gotten big, have gotten valuable, and if they want to extend further, they may need more nuanced IPFi strategies that are suited to them. So if I were to take a traditional example, like companies can take debt financing, right? So debt financing is when you borrow money and you don't have to sacrifice the ownership of your company in order to grow your company. So you can take that capital to grow your project. Why is it that today, for artists to expand on their IP, they must sell their entire rights to publishing companies and lose control over their IP in order to go from a manga to an anime or go from a book to a movie? Why can't successful IPs borrow capital against their characters, their stories, and so they are able to develop those expansions of IP into new audiences without losing control of their assets? So there are parallels, for IPFi that we can look into TradFi, right, to help more successful IPs access more nuanced forms of financing in order to further their goals. So these are some of the other points that are all ideas I think builders can look at, but this is kind of what I would like structured IPFi as a category for how people should think about further developments of finance utilization. And then there's one other category that I personally very excited about, and that is experimental IPFi. So this is, I think, brought about by the fact that Story has a new open registration system for IP rights, which means that there will be services that are needed that kind of don't have parallels anywhere. So I would, I think for this, I'd just like to raise one example of a team that's building with us and what kind of issues they have noticed and what they're trying to solve. So in the open registration system, you can imagine a lot of people will register random IPs and if they don't belong to them, or they just, for example, a malicious person might register Mickey Mouse as their own just because they think, when Disney actually comes, they will have to pay them for that registration right or something like this is very similar to website swapping. And so in open systems, there are new challenges that the current Web 2 closed system using lawyers doesn't have. So then how do you solve the issue of IPs being misregistered on Story, and how do you ensure that the right assets are surfaced to creators, to users, so that everyone is participating in authentic assets? One of the teams that we're working with is using a proof of stake mechanism to try to solve this. The idea is very similar to proof of stake chains, right? If you're putting capital up to make sure that blocks that are verified on an ongoing basis are true, and if you do not support or if you try to falsify the data, you get flagged. So it's economic security. Can we port that concept onto supporting IP assets? Can you stake capital into IP assets that are real? And if you stake into a false asset and vouch for assets that are not true, then they get flagged, thereby incentivizing real assets to surface within an open ecosystem. these are concepts that are very experimental. And then even we don't really know the full extent of functions that we needed in an open IP registration system. But we do hope to see builders, look at the issues that come up and Story builds out, and also have visions of and ideas of how to build new entire verticals that other people have not attempted before. So with the practical bits of sequencing done, I think I'll just like to go back, talk about IPFi at a high level. Right? Stories IPFi is really about being a financial engine of intellectual property. Right? I've talked about how it all supports intellectual property creation and transfer. And I think one last thing I'd like to leave builders in here today is Story has created a system that is very unique and has created, I think, an area for new experimentation. Today, registration of Story is really down. You're able to obtain your legal rights. You're able to collaborate with other people's assets at the cost of just getting, right? No longer you need to pay lawyers, pay IP registries across multiple worlds to work on and expand and defend the rights of the IP created. And so we would love for IPFi builders to come join us to help that system flourish, and also in a way that respects that intellectual property creators and users don't really care for the fact that the IPFi verticals have a lot of technology. Right? I think a lot of lessons can be learned in terms of providing good UI UX to simplify providing that financial service down to very simple concepts. People don't have to really understand the inner workings of all these. And so IPFi builders that focus on UI UX, simplifying how you service both users, investors, will be builders that we're very, very keen to connect with. Yeah, so with that, thanks everyone. I'll hand back the time to Andrea.